Reserve water here, okay?
Okay.
People ask and say, so how long do you ever prep for the show? Like, do you ever read? I'm like, gosh, get up at 5, start reading at 5:30. And one of my sites that I go to, my fourth one, is Reason.com. Love Reason.com. Love it because libertarian website, well done. Always be able to sort of poke the bear in either side, but always coming to a position of free markets and free minds. And I came across this piece, and I see Corey all the time. It's sort of Corey DeAngelis. I'm like, wow, I'm going to get this on the phone. So Joe, taking over for Jacob, who could never get anybody on the phone, makes one phone call, gets Corey on. Corey DeAngelis from the director of the School Choice and Reason Foundation. I'm a huge fan, and I wanted to talk to you. Thanks for coming on, by the way.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, listen, I was telling Jake, who's filling in here for Shari, you know, we've had so many stories recently in the news. These kids, they smash cars and they go in there and shoot somebody, or juvenile crime just off the charts. And I remember a piece that I had seen from, and you've probably seen as well, David Deming did this, I think back in 2015 or 2011. Okay. Explain what that study was.
Yeah, this actually was the impetus for one of my first studies as a PhD student at the University of Arkansas. His study, I believe, was published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. He's a Harvard researcher, and it was called More Choice, Less Crime, or something like that.
Yeah.
And he found that getting access to go to a school of your choice in, I want to say it was North Carolina.
That's right, yeah.
It significantly reduced the likelihood of crime for male students in particular. I believe it was like a 50% reduction in crime for high-risk male students. So it was one of the first studies, if not the first one, to link school choice, getting to choose a school that works best for your kid, to long-term outcomes such as criminal activity. Mostly these studies look at, what is the effect on standardized test scores. But, parents care about a lot of things when they're choosing their kids' schools. Partially it's safety, partially character development, not being around gangs and violence. Mm-hmm. And so lo and behold, you get into a better school, you're less likely to commit crimes later on in life. I actually later on did a study of the Milwaukee Private School Choice Program with Patrick J. Wolf, a professor at the University of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And we similarly found about a 50% reduction in crime from getting access to private schools.
Right, because I see this crime stuff as it's an upstream problem, right? You got to fix it upstream. I remember reading about this kid who he's in gangs and then he's in jail, and he said, I failed at everything I did in school. It wasn't until I joined this gang and then started robbing people that I was succeeding at something, at anything. It didn't matter. It was the fact that he was succeeding at something because he had been a failure every other step along the way. So I see it as an upstream problem. Fix the upstream problem. If you were to put the kid in a school and the parent had the choice to put the kid in that school and the school was able to teach that child and that parent was satisfied with the growth and the development of the child, well, then there's less likely that kid's going to come out and cost, society, one, incarcerating the kid. I think it's $250,000 a year. And just the additional damage to the individual, never get a chance to grow to their full potential, all that other stuff. So to me, this seems really simple. If those numbers hold true, like your study and Deming's study holds true, why wouldn't we be offering more of this choice so that we don't have some kid who's 14 years old failing in school and going around and hitting somebody over the head or carjacking or shooting somebody?
Yeah, exactly. And since we've done our studies, there's actually been 6 peer-reviewed studies on the topic linking school choice to crime reduction. All 6 of them are peer-reviewed and find statistically significant reductions in crime. So this is a small area of research, but it is pretty clear the direction of reducing crime. And the problem is that even though school choice is supported among Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike, when you take it to the voters, I mean, the latest Real Clear Opinion research polling nationwide found 71% of Americans support school choice with supermajority support across party lines. It just so happens that the Democratic Party, however, they only listen to some of their constituents, which happen to be the teachers unions who basically are an arm of the Democratic Party at this point. If you look at Randy Weingarten's union, she's the most hated union boss of our day. The American Federation of Teachers. She fought to keep the schools closed and then tried to gaslight the American public to say, no, we were actually trying to open them. And she basically lied in front of Congress to do so. But 99.97% of their campaign contributions went to Democrats in 2022. And it's been like that for over 3 decades now. And so when you're a politician in office, you respond to political pressure. And for a long time, the Democrats have just kind of listened to the unions who own them. But there's a new union in town, and they're called parents. And if enough parents, if they band together and create enough pressure, we can even get headways in purplish or even blue states if enough parents apply that political pressure. But that's the only way to change things going forward. We've had a lot of success in red states. Well, that's because, school choice is on the Republican Party platform. They're already the parents' party, listening to what parents want, and they're not owned by the teachers unions, at least as much as Democrats. So the way that you move forward in blue states, it has to be from the bottom up with parents organizing. And if the Republicans band together, even if there's only a few in your state, well, maybe they'll start to win some elections on the issue of parental rights, like we saw with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, just totally demolishing Terry McAuliffe in a blue state, who said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. That didn't work out for him.
Hey, Corey, do you think, I was reading that study you guys were referencing earlier, that Harvard study, and it talked about how in this lottery system, kids were given the opportunity to attend the school that they wanted to attend, and they had to go a little bit further away from where they lived, and probably actually the commute was helpful in them not being able to be just in proximity to the bad things that were happening. That was like a huge benefit to them, because they just weren't around other kids who were doing, committing crimes, and then down the road they were having better lives because of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called neighborhood effects. Look, I mean, I experienced this myself. I went to government schools all K through 12, and in middle school, kids were doing drugs. It was cool to be in a gang. If you got into a fight, it was encouraged, right? It was a bad scenario. I ended up getting the opportunity to go to a magnet school in high school, a school choice school, and it was a much better scenario than the high school that I was assigned to. And so, just being in closer proximity to a good influence is obviously going to have a huge positive impact on your lifelong success. And I'm glad you mentioned the lottery design of that study. It's basically like a medical trial. It's called randomized controlled trial, where they compare students who won the lottery to those who lost the lottery. And if you have a big enough sample size, you can be pretty dang confident that the effects are causal. It's not because the student's parents are any different or because the student, is more advantaged in some other way. Because they use random lottery to determine the winners and losers, the treatment and control groups were on average the same. So we could attribute those effects to getting a better school.
The other thing that I found interesting about it, it seems like we're really confused about whether or not this is a good idea for elementary school kids or junior high or high school kids. But we all can admit that the idea in college is you want to choose to go to the best college that you can possibly go to. Oftentimes that means you're not going to a college in your neighborhood. I, for instance, went to a college that was 2,000 miles from where I grew up because that was the best college that I could get into. So why does that seem to be lost when we think about, obviously I'm not saying advocating to send little kids 2,000 miles away from home, but there are better schools within your area, and it makes sense for college students. Why wouldn't it make sense for elementary and junior high and high school kids?
Well, what else makes sense to Democrats, at least, is with Pell Grants for higher education. They support choice, right? The voucher, the Pell Grant can be used at a private or public, even religious university. With vouchers for pre-K, Head Start program, for example, Democrats support that. You can choose your pre-K with that funding, and it can go to a religious pre-K if you want. But for K-12 education, those in-between years, it's different. And the only difference is one of power dynamics. Choice is the norm for higher education, pre-K, and just about everything else. But choice threatens an entrenched special interest, the teachers and superintendents unions, only when it comes to K-12 education. So the politicians that they put in power fight as hard as possible against any change to the status quo. Think about it. Democrats support food stamps that can be used at any private provider of groceries that you want for your family.
Right.
With all these Medicaid vouchers, you can use those at religious hospitals if you want. The funding follows the decision of the parent or the family or the student when it comes to college. Why not support it when it comes to K through 12? Well, it's because the unions don't want you to.
So you're starting to see some change, because I think the last one I'd see that some numbers, this is from 2021, 19 states now have funding for the parent and sort of school choice. And now they're starting this educational savings account that you would give you the money. You could go. I think Arizona has that now. West Virginia's put this in place. Ohio, New Hampshire. It's coming. But in a state like Washington, where the union takes the money, gives it to the governor and the soon the governor to be, and basically they buy that person's votes. So that person, I'm not going to step out of line with these guys because they could screw me. I'll end up with no money, or they'll fund my opponent, and I won't win. And ultimately, in the end, it's the kid who suffers and the parent who suffers, and then all of us suffer. This kid is now 14, 15, killing people on the streets because their one school was not the place for them. They didn't learn how to read. They continue to fail. But if you just look at this, again, the upstream problem of fixing it where the kid could be in a school and the parent could be in touch with that school, and the school would then be responsible to that parent because there's competition. The kid could go somewhere else and the parent could take the money with them. It seems so simple. Am I missing anything?
No, you're not. And the public schools up their game in response to that competition. We have 29 studies on that topic. 26 of them are positive. So school choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats. And look, the way you get this done in Washington, there's a couple of ways. You know, if you're in a blue state, one, you can put it on the ballot directly to the voters. That way you circumvent the legislators who are owned by the teachers unions. People are more supportive than politicians who are owned by the teachers unions. That's one way to do it. You can get local school districts to hopefully pass a local school choice program. If you can get Republicans at least to take over one of the school districts, you can try a test case there, and maybe other school districts want to emulate that idea. And then you can also tell your Republican politicians to follow the Glenn Youngkin blueprint from Virginia. Lean into parental rights as a political winner, and then it'll become political suicide for Democrats to oppose it at some point. They don't want to be like Terry McAuliffe and lose their election. So some Democrats may start to defect on the issue, and we're seeing some high-profile Democrats, including Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He put education savings accounts in his or scholarships in his education platform right before the midterms last year. And he even went on Fox News a few months ago supporting private school choice.
Yeah, but then he reneged on that thing. Didn't Shapiro? Yeah, at the last minute, he flipped on it.
He did. Right after going on Fox, he ended up caving to the teachers unions. But he's in a real weird predicament right now. He's basically having to say, oh, it's the House's fault. But as a politician, if you're explaining, you're losing. And to voters, it looks like he just lied.
Yeah.
And he just ultimately caved. That's the most likely and most obvious explanation. But my larger point is that he felt compelled to signal to voters that he supports school choice is good news in the long run, because it's showing the political winds are shifting.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen all at once, but the more that the Republicans win on this issue, the more Democrats will either lose their seats or they will have to come along, and it'll become more of a bipartisan thing among politicians.
Corey, another thing that was really interesting about that Harvard study that I found, when they did this randomized lottery and they let the parents choose where these kids were going to go to school, and then the money would follow the kid, the bad schools, I think in the study it says 2 schools ended up closing down that were really bad. And it's just the idea that parents know when their kids are getting a bad education, and they ran away from those schools, which scares the heck out of the teachers unions, because they don't want those schools to close down. They want those to stay open. And parents know this is a bad deal. My kid's not going to get a good education here. They're running with bad groups, and we want them to go to better schools. Is that basically... That's kind of the long and short of it. That's why they don't want this to happen.
Yeah, look, that's a feature of school choice, not a bug. So underperforming private schools shut down because parents can vote with their feet.
Yes,
underperforming
and they should.
Yeah, the government schools they just say, oh, we're failing because we need more money, and then we just throw more money at the problem. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But for the most part, the public schools, they figure crap out, and they start to do a little better. And most of the evidence, 26 to 29 studies find public schools improve as opposed to shutting down. Yes, there could be some cases where that happens, but look, I mean, should we be more interested in what's happening to the schools, or should we be interested in helping the students themselves? We should fund the student, not the school, and give families a choice, just like we do with basically everything else that the Democrats support.
There you go. Corey DeAngelis, appreciate it. The director of School Choice and Reason Foundation. Keep up the good work. If you have school choice, could possibly reduce juvenile delinquents and crime. Thank you, Corey. Appreciate it. Keep up.
Thanks so much.
Keep putting the good stuff out there. Reason.com.